Hello, everyone. Welcome this morning to Fundamentals with Matt Burk. I am your host, Matt Burk. This series is designed to help you understand everything you need to know about how, why, and when to or not to launch and run a real estate fund. It can be really tricky to do that, and trying to bring as much advice, guidance, experience around doing that as we possibly can. And today, if you're familiar at all with Fairway or Verivest, you might know this guy's a partner of mine and someone I've known for many years. Today we have on the show Darris Cassidy with Fairway and Verivest. Hey, Darris, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's I understand you're off to Tahoe today for a conference with Way Capital and go and visit some GPs and LPs and do a little skiing down in at Heavenly, huh? Is that the plan?
That's the plan. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. People think my job is kind of crazy, but it's part of the job. So although it's a lot of fun, it's just interesting some of the trips that I get to go on.
Yeah, well, that's
be able
part
to do
of
it.
what it takes to raise capital, right? I mean, isn't that like I know that's been a big part of what you've done here for the last 10 years is raising money, and so maybe we'll start there with. So this is a good example of some of the stuff that you need to do, huh?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentor others, and I've had younger people ask how to raise capital. One of the things that constantly comes up is kind of living the lifestyle of the investors. And, investors tend to ski and vacation and live in some fun places, such as Tahoe, or, I mean, you and I have traveled around the world really meeting with investors. And so this is just an example, I think, of a little bit of that is going down to Tahoe. And most of it's just socializing and hanging out. Of course, business comes up as part of that. And developing the relationships that can turn into capital is more of the way to raise capital, I believe, than kind of the hardcore sales that some people seem to take. So,
yeah. Why don't you give people a little bit of background on yourself? I know you came here through the banking world, kind of grew up in commercial real estate, but share with people a little bit about your background, give some context for the rest of the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, like you mentioned, I kind of grew up in the business. My father being a commercial mortgage banker, so making life insurance loans against commercial properties. So understood the business from an early age. My first job out of high school was at an appraisal company, kind of as a runner, doing a little bit of everything. Got a degree in finance from Gonzaga, went into commercial real estate banking, did that for a few years, and then took a position with a real estate developer doing land development, home building, apartment development, condos, some industrial investment. So was essentially the CFO of that company for several years through the housing boom and then housing bust. Started my first, I'll call them mini funds. Didn't really know what I was doing exactly. Coming out of during the Great Recession, buying pools of single family homes, selling those on contracts, creating paper and cash flows. Then eventually sold those portfolios off, and then partnered up, came over to Fairway in early of 2012. And I mean, I can get into the rest of it, but I think that's where some of the discussion should go as to what we've done since then. And that's taken that background that I just touched on and helping to grow Fairway and Verivest into what they are today.
Yeah, and so you truly have grown up in the business. I mean, literally from the time you were in high school, familiar with debt coverage ratios and financing commercial real estate and appraisal and banking and finance degree. So I mean, it seems like pretty much lived your whole life in this business, and then kind of got into the capital raise side of the equation more once you got on the Fairway squad. But before we get into that, I think as a lot of people may know, we've spent a lot of time in the last 10 years working on helping people set up funds. So Fairway's run, I think we're on our 10th or 11th fund of our own that we manage the assets for. And since 2012, when Darris joined, that was the point at which we started doing advisory and consulting for other people. And I think Darris, that was, part of the origin of that. You're a great example. I mean, you were running your own fund, right? Or mini fund, as you put it, in 2010 and 11. You tell us about that experience. I mean, you hired a lawyer. You didn't really know what you were getting into, didn't understand which is super common, right? That's how it is for almost everybody. So tell us about that experience.
Yeah. And I kind of came up in the corporate world for a few years until I figured out that wasn't going to work for me. And then just for reasons people can figure out on their own, I'm sure. But, went to work for an entrepreneur, a true entrepreneur, and that was a great experience. But we were primarily using his equity. And so I was responsible for sourcing our debt, which is in a lot of ways easier to find than the equity. So I got pretty good on the debt side of finding that capital and structuring it, but really had not had to do much of the equity because we always had it as part of the guy that I worked for. So kind of as I went out on my own, as you're talking about, I, during the Great Recession, found myself without a job is what ended up happening. And I remember very distinctly sitting in a Starbucks or a coffee shop of some sort in Portland with my computer open, looking at these packages of homes. And I had already bought one or two with this single one person's money. And so I was looking through homes, kind of trying to do some due diligence on a package I was looking at, but I didn't have capital, and just kind of the way the world works sometimes. This guy that I barely knew walked up and, without me knowing, was kind of looking over my shoulder and watching what I was looking at.
Stealing your stuff?
Well, no, it turned out we had met one time, and he was a Nike executive that also found himself without a job during the Great Recession, but had some money, was older than me at the time, and interrupted me to say, "Hey, I've been watching over your shoulder," which is a little creepy, but what are you doing? I'm interested in whatever you're looking at here. And so I told him the whole model of what I was up to, and he, on the spot, wanted to invest something like $300,000 or $500,000.
So that's how you raise capital. You go to a coffee shop, open up your computer, make sure someone with money is looking at it, right? And
that was.
Hey, can I give you some money?
That's not too far from sometimes how you raise capital. And this one of my old bosses in banking, who we now do business with otherwise, Kevin Kelly. I remember when I was like 23, 24 years old, Kevin said to me, he came into our office one day, he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean? I'm at work," right? And he said, "Well, real estate doesn't happen in here. Like, get out of here, go find deals, go originate some loans. It's not here." So his point was, start driving around until something happens. Like, look at all the signs, look at who's doing deals. And that's what I did. And I've kind of taken that sort of approach to capital raising, is just sitting around in the office and hoping your phone rings isn't going to get the job done. But that is how I raised my first dollars.
This guy comes up and says, "Hey, I've been looking at this," and then, then what happens?
And so, I mean, we had a handshake. He wrote me a check that afternoon, no documents at the time. We put together an operating agreement a day or two later, a real crappy one. We used his attorney. Didn't fully appreciate waterfall structures at the time. And then he and I had some success in that package we bought with his money. And so he became my co-GP, and we rolled that into a new entity, which I then did go out and raise some money. And I did that through a relationship that I had from a guy that was also in real estate finance that had some money, and he pooled his friends' money together, kind of an allocator sort of thing. And they all came in to my new fund, and we bought several more packages with that capital. Come to find out years later, kind of to jump to what we've been doing for others, is I misstructured that whole thing. And partly because I got the waterfall wrong. And so I ended up doing fine and making management fees along the way and a little bit of profit here and there. But, my investors made out quite a bit better than I did because I'm not going to be able to remember it at the moment, but I think I kind of switched the order of the return of capital and the preferred return. And so it was like I was always playing catch up on the waterfall and never
Yeah,
could
and
get
how did you
ahead
make
of
that determination in the first place on what that structure actually looked like?
it. Well, I had no one to turn to, except an attorney, and he was great at giving me a set of legal documents, but he basically said, what do you want the waterfall to look like? And I thought, and I'm a finance person, I can model all sorts of things out, but there was really nowhere to turn. And this was 2009, 10, something like that. And so there just wasn't a lot of information out on the web. There weren't advisors to go to that I could find or figure it out. So I made it up on my own.
Yeah, and my experience over the last 10 years, and we've done, I don't know, hundreds of engagements with real estate fund managers, syndicators, direct acquisition people, discounted notes, tax lien certificates, mortgage pool funds, you name it, right? We've seen it. And that's a very, very common experience, right? Is that historically, people go to a lawyer, which you need to do. I mean, you have to have
Hmm.
documents that comply with the law, right? But the
Yeah,
lawyer's
you're right.
looking for the business guy or gal to tell them what they want the terms to be. And oftentimes the new person who hasn't done it before is looking to the lawyer for the suggestions around what it should be. And they're sort of talking past each other because neither of them has the expertise that they need. So it's just a super common issue
Yeah.
in the marketplace. And I mean, I've just seen it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So you did that first fund. You guys, I know you ended up, I'd actually never heard that story from you around the coffee shop thing, but
Yeah.
I know that you ended up hiring a securities lawyer that was turned out to be, in retrospect, a
Hmm.
mutual contact of ours. And then, you kind of came over to Fairway in 2012, and since then have, been actively involved in a lot of the growth of our advisory and fund business, and ultimately Redwood Real Estate Administration, which became Verivest. But so during that time, I mean, raising capital for both of these, what is your experience on raising capital for funds versus doing it one deal at a time? How does that differ? What do you think are the issues that people deal with that they
Sure.
might not know if they're coming in doing it one deal at a time and bringing it, trying to do it in a fund? What's your experience there?
So, one of the things that I did correct in my story that I just said is it was appropriate for me to set up a fund for that particular strategy because there were so many assets and there was a velocity of assets. And so I think that's a key component to raising capital in a fund. It's really hard to raise capital in a fund if it's a really broad strategy or if there's not a lot of activity to that. You may as well probably do that kind of one deal at a time. And of course, that differs where that line is when to start a fund. But that said, so that helps in the sense of if you have a strategy that is somewhat in a box that you're doing over and over again, raising capital in a fund is easier for that. If it's a unique deal or it's one that only comes around once, two, three, four times a year, maybe, raising capital on an individual basis can make more sense. However, raising money on the individual basis creates a lot of time pressure because you have hard earnest money, you've got these finite dates. And so you need to be really confident in your abilities to raise kind of one deal at a time. That said, just because you have a fund, it doesn't just automatically fill up. However, one of the nicer things about having a fund is you can use the same pitch, the same marketing material, and kind of create momentum in a in raising for a fund, which is hard to do in a syndication. A syndication is like, if you don't start raising immediately and get it done and get a lot of momentum within a week or two, it can struggle to get all the way to the finish line. Whereas with a fund, you can kind of take your time to create more of a capital raise strategy around it.
Yeah, but don't investors have different preferences around whether or not to come, because a lot of them, it's a blind pool, right? They don't know what the
Yeah.
assets are coming in, right? So sometimes people
Yes.
don't like that because they don't know which assets they are, and they want to pick and choose which deal they put their money into. And other people
Absolutely.
would prefer the diversification of a pooled investment fund, so they're not, putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak, for a specific deal. So describe the differences of that.
Well, I think you touched on it where some investors really prefer to pick and choose individual deals and kind of re-underwrite it for themselves on a single deal. But a lot of investors don't want to do that. However, what I have found is that because it is blind, it takes a lot of trust from your investors to invest
Mm-hmm.
into a fund for good reason, and it should. Whereas on an individual deal, the investors are more looking at that deal. How is that deal going to perform? And of course, the competency and the trust factor and integrity of the manager or sponsor is super important for the single deal. But it's a lot more important for a fund because there's a lot more going on. Funds are complicated. The investors are blind to not only the assets, but a lot of the other decisions that happen in those funds regarding the sales, budgets,
Yeah.
fees, administration and accounting, how that's done. Um, so you have to be very trustworthy and have strong relationships to raise in a pooled fund. Whereas I find that for single asset deals, you don't have to have as much of that.
Yeah, especially when you're raising from people who are very savvy real estate people. I think they
Yeah.
oftentimes prefer the individual deals because they get to pick and choose their own stuff. Whereas
Yep.
maybe the corporate executive or the people who are looking for more passive income, they tend to be more attracted to and conducive for fund offerings. So
Yes.
what are you, I know that lately, the last year or two, you've spent a lot more time over at Verivest, and that company has some interesting things
Mm-hmm.
happening, kind of carrying forward a lot of the advisory and fund setup and administration work that we've done. What's going on over there these days that you're working on?
Yeah, so we are doing some exciting things. Really, we're taking a lot of this discussion and putting it out for other real estate entrepreneurs and managers that are either coming up in the business or even those that are mature in the business, and providing them guidance and advice, and doing a lot of that structuring now through automated processes. So a lot of software that we've built over the years. Um,
Yeah, what does that mean?
to what I
What does that mean when you say automated, setup?
It's
Like, how does that?
well, let's go back to my earlier story from, at this point, almost 15 years ago. I wish I had what Verivest is creating, and that's really the way that I have approached as we've built the business. What did I need or want? And there's a lot of things to that, and that's what Verivest provides to managers at this point, which is some educate things like this podcast or webinar as an example. Like, this didn't exist, so some education like this, and then it's the ability to go onto the website and just answer however many questions and have that kick out a set of documents and get some guidance along the way as to what a preferred return is, what order of that waterfall is appropriate, and have some guardrails rather than making it up in my own head. So that's a lot of what Verivest can do. So managers can now go on and create single asset syndication offerings. So you can go on, answer a bunch of questions, and it'll kick out your documents. It will also create a online marketing website, which has a link for investors to click invest now. And that will take them right into filling out the documents electronically, which then takes them into our administration abilities to do all their accounting, bookkeeping, investor distributions, capital accounts, all of which I didn't have at the time. So, you know, it really has allowed for managers to focus on the real estate. And of course, you have to have these offering documents. You have to have your investors fill out their subscription documents. And you have to raise money, and doing so, having a marketing website is kind of the new way to do that, rather than having these pitch decks and, you know, PowerPoints that we used to create. So
Yeah,
that's
a ton
a lot of
has
what it is.
changed in the last 10, 15 years, right? I mean, you have now crowdfunding sites, you have a lot more, you know, technology portals and things for investors that didn't exist when we were starting this out 10 years ago, right? I still
Yeah.
find that the ability to move to a pooled investment fund is a bit of a black box for most people, because the things you have to deal with in a pooled fund that you don't in a one-off syndication are, there's a ton of them, and they're interconnected, and everything affects everything else in ways that people don't fully appreciate until they're in it, right? So that's the piece
Absolutely.
that I find to be, you know, still universally misunderstood, you know, by people that you know, to your point, like if you knew what you needed to know going in, you probably would have done that first fund differently, right, with the benefit of
Yep.
hindsight, right? So if you'd have had something
Yes.
to be able to do it, you know, accurately or better from the beginning, that, you know, that's the trick.
And that doing it better from the beginning would have benefited not only myself, but also the investors, right? And
Yeah.
that's a big part of what I figured out. And to what you're saying, a lot of people have this misconception that you launch a fund and you raise capital and just fill with capital, and then you have discretion to do deals. That's not exactly how it goes. It's very
No.
difficult to raise capital in a fund. But the other thing that I tell these young want to be fund managers that want to move toward that is that running a fund is a whole business and skill set upon itself, right? To
Yeah.
what you're saying. So it's not just start a fund, raise capital, do deals the way you always have done it. It's a whole new type of a business that you need to get really good at running day to day. And there's a lot of decisions that people just don't understand that, you know, are part of the daily life of a fund manager.
Yeah, and I think, you know, of all the things that we've done over the years, some some people have succeeded wildly with funds. Many of them have spent the time, effort, money getting it all set up, and then it doesn't go anywhere, and then they end up sticking to, you know, kind of how they did it before, and it just, you know, it just depends on the individual. It depends on the asset strategy. It depends on their volume. It depends on, you know, how good they are
Mhm.
at hiring and managing people. Right, and finding the
Yeah.
appropriate skill sets necessary to, you know, complement the skill set of the primary entrepreneur who's running the business, right? There's just a lot to
And
it.
this is what I think Veravest is doing a good job of is I didn't have a lot of those resources back when, right? I needed I was doing the accounting, and I was doing the distributions, and I was overseeing all the assets, and I was doing all of the above,
Originating, raising capital, right?
all of it. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's just too much for these boutique or smaller shops and outside of skill sets. And then you find yourself spending time on things that you're not really good at as an entrepreneur. Veravest has solved a lot of that by providing these services to these entrepreneurs to really allow them to focus on the real estate. But there still are these items about fund management that people really need to know if they're going to go into that space.
Well, and the thing I think is, for a lot of people, you know, you have to be careful about your overhead, right, and your fixed costs. So,
Hmm.
you know, a lot of these are skills that you need to run a successful fund and successful fund management business, but you don't necessarily want to have to carry them all on your payroll, right? Because especially when you're
Yep.
small, you just can't generate enough fee income to cover the costs of all of those people. So you have to really try to balance fixed costs versus the variable costs and structure it in a way that allows you to grow and scale without necessarily, becoming a huge organization. And some people want to do that because they want more control over it. And over time, you may hire and bring more things on internally, right? But a lot of people don't want that. I mean, they didn't get into on being an entrepreneur because they wanted to manage a ton of people. Right. That's often the bane of the existence of a lot of entrepreneurs in my experience. So, hey, Darris, we're kind of running out of time. I know you got to catch a flight to Tahoe today. So let's kind of wrap up here. A couple other lightning round questions, but I know you're a big education guy, lifelong learning and all that. We share a lot of material back and forth in books, and Audible and so forth. What's one thing you're reading, book, audiobook, podcast, something you're paying attention to these days that you find valuable?
I have historically been reading several business books all at the same time, and at the moment I'm kind of off the business books, I think, since the new year, and been listening to quite a few fitness type podcasts and about working out and nutrition and that sort of thing. That's just kind of where I'm at the moment. So sometimes
it goes in waves,
true
right?
crime in there.
Yeah, sometimes I'm heavy on the business book. Sometimes it's autobiography. So I just finished one on listening to a biography of Led Zeppelin, which is fascinating. Those guys were out of control. So,
yeah, I'll have to listen to that.
But some,
that's where I'm at.
Gotta mix it
I think
up, right?
sometimes when we're so busy in our business, it's hard during my downtime to listen to other people talk about business. So it helps me to break it up with some other topics here and there. But I'm actually going to start today. I just downloaded it last night. Jay Glazer's book. It's called Unbreakable. Jay Glazer is one of the speakers tonight in Tahoe, and he recently wrote a book that's supposed to be really good. So I'm going to try and listen to that on the flight and the drive to Tahoe. I'm actually giving a presentation or a talk or a panel session when I'm down there as well. So I think I get to hang out with Jay for a little bit of that.
That'd be cool.
So
what do you have going on? Anything exciting you got going on that people can look forward to? I know you're Verivest is launching Fund Builder. That's a big release. Get going on that. Anything else going on that?
Fairway has several deals, syndication deals that I'm helping on the capital raise for. But yeah, really excited about what Verivest is up to and some of the product launches and releases. I think there's a big opportunity in that space to help the real estate entrepreneurs through the services and automation and technology Verivest can provide them. So just really excited about what we're doing at Verivest, and I think it's going to be an interesting next few quarters as we roll out additional products.
Yeah, especially right now. I mean, a lot of crazy capital markets volatility going on. So it'll be interesting to see how the business changes over the next year or two. What's the best way for people to reach you? How do people get a hold of you if they want to do that?
Usually email. I do. I'm on LinkedIn, so people can find me on LinkedIn, connect with me there, and then send a message. I do check my LinkedIn messages. I get a lot of spam through there, of course, but if you write something that I can tell it's actually written personally, so I'll definitely respond that way, and then usually take it offline to email. My email address is darris.cassidy@verivest.com or @fairway.com. Either way, you can reach me there. That's usually the best way to reach me, and then happy to chat with people on the phone as appropriate.
All right. Well, hey, man, thanks for joining us this morning. I know you getting out of the snow up here in Portland to get down to the heavier snow in Tahoe. So
they apparently have about 15 feet of snow down there. I was reading last night, so it's pretty incredible. So
yeah, well, it should make for good skiing conditions, I hope, huh?
Yeah, I hope so.
All right. Well, Darris, thanks for joining us. We're going to take a break next week. It won't have a show. Darris and I will both be in Salt Lake City next week for the best ever real estate conference and hosting the Verivest Pitch Slam there on Thursday and Friday, and Wednesday, Thursday finals on Friday. But we'll be in Salt Lake next week. So be back here in 2 weeks with another episode of Fundamentals. And in the meantime, take care and stay sharp.